Hey! Is it all working? God almighty. Too early for this stuff. I think we're on. Yes, it's all looking good. So yeah, good morning everybody. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different today. One of our guild members a couple of nights back said they were having issues with archers in the game, like getting them to come out smoothly. So rather than do what I normally do, which is to basically pre-record a load of footage, cut it all nice and neatly together, I'm going to attempt to do this just live in stream and then we'll see what happens. It's probably going to go horribly, horribly wrong. But yeah, who cares? Side note, shout out to our guild member who made that, by the way. We do have a video up on our YouTube channel for that. For this I need to go over to my claim, which is over here. By the Tower of Pimps. Yeah, just a quick point, I'm only leaving my claim boundary area up just for a couple of minutes, just while I place a couple of things out, just so I can see where everything is. Once I've done that, I'll remove it, just so it's not getting in the way of the camera. So yeah, the plan for this is I'm going to start off with the more basic methods first, and then I'm going to go into a couple of more different ways to get archers. Not just necessarily doing what I'm about to do now, but also going in like how you can do them with what they're calling micro-voxels, but it's essentially just a smoothed out voxel. So yeah, here we go. So yeah, the first version of this is the most basic one. The idea is you basically create a massive cube of space, like what I've done here, fill it, and then you're going to want to actually get the sphere delete. And the way you do that, you hop straight over to your shapes, select the sphere. It will automatically think you're wanting to add something like what it's done here, but if you actually hit the delete option instead, it changes to a delete size. And the idea of this is you don't want to necessarily use the very, very smallest sphere. You can do, but it's a little bit inconsistent in terms of what you'll end up producing further down the line. Very similar to what happens with a lot of things like the line tool and stuff like that, you don't really want to use the smallest option if you can possibly avoid it. I'm going to use a really over-exaggerated version just so you can really see this, so I'm going to actually scale this up quite a bit. So yeah, the idea here is you kind of want to get the sphere more or less half and half. So you want kind of half of it sitting out of the cube, half of it in. You don't necessarily have to do that, but it makes it a little bit easier on yourself. So yeah, if you're not sure, you can always just mess around. You basically use the scroller on the mouse, and it's like, well, where's the middle? Middle's around about there, ish. Always remember, if it doesn't come out quite like how you want it, you can always use Control Z to undo it and start again, so don't necessarily be put off by that. Yeah, however, this has actually come out quite nice. It generally does. You can sometimes get distortion, but most of the time with something this size it's usually okay. The idea then is that you basically take your selection tool and you take out a middle slice. You only want it like a couple of voxels wide, you don't really want an absolutely massive space. Yeah, so when you actually go to select the middle section, you ideally, and I've already screwed this up based on where my mouse cursor was before I started this. Hang on. When you're selecting it, you want to try and make sure that the entire arch itself is going to be selected. The way you can do that is basically just watch what happens to the selection tool. So I tend to actually pull the selection up a little bit first and then drop it down into the space I want to select. And as you'll see, the actual bottom will go white, which essentially means I've now selected that area. However, I'm just going to make this a little bit taller. So yeah, that's basically your basic shape that you've got, so you can kind of see the bit I've got selected there is this middle arch selection. Trust me to start filming when it's in the middle of the night as well. Hang on. So this shape is essentially the selection I copied. There we go. So it's essentially just a matter of rotating the shape around, because obviously when you select it like that, you've effectively got it inverted. And yes, I am streaming to one of my guys in chat. Hello! So yeah, you can see it generally makes it quite nice and smooth. You don't really get a whole lot of distortion on it. And yeah, I mean that's essentially the most basic way to make an arch. The next step up from that is a slight variation on making a cylinder. And the idea of it is that rather than necessarily having the entire big shape, you can still do that, but rather than having necessarily fixed sizes, you can customize it. So give me a sec just to delete all this here stuff, and we'll get going on that. So if anyone's seen our sphere videos, the idea of that is that you essentially have a base template, and I'll show you like the result of what you get from that. So whenever you're making a sphere in the game, effectively you're using kind of the same technique if you want to make a custom shaped arch. So I'm going to kind of show you a version of this, and you can kind of guess that it's like if you select essentially half of that size, you're going to have an arch shape based to the size that you want it to. Now, when you're doing this version of what I'm going to do here, this is kind of where certain stuff that's been useful, and effectively anything that's been used for making round shaped with squares. So you'll find like a lot of people have done like fancy things in Minecraft and stuff like that, where you've effectively made what is a roughly round looking wall, but with a landmark you can physically smooth out that shape off a square, and that's kind of where this is coming from. Yeah, I'm just going to do this with something that marks out on the little plate I've put here, just so it makes a bit more sense. So yeah, if you're ever trying to find these templates, there's loads of websites about. I'm trying to think of which one I tend to use. Yeah, either way, I mean, if you search for like pixel shape generator on Google, you'll probably find about 20 billion of them, because this stuff gets used a lot in Minecraft, so naturally it's quite popular. So yeah, you can kind of see here is that this is essentially going to be an 18 voxel wide archway, and the main bit you actually want is that selection. The idea of this is that you're going to build this up, smooth it out, and then copy and rotate it. What are you? I'm trying to think how best to pronounce your name there in chat. Essentially, all I'm showing right now in game is how to do different style arches. There's different ways to do it depending on what sort of sizes you want. So I've just been going through a couple of different ones. This is kind of the first version of what will eventually be a micro-voxel template, which is why I won't delete this, but I'll come back to that later on. Yeah, it's always worth making sure that you're not actually selecting anything apart from the little bit of the template you want. Now, the problem you'll get here, and you'll see this as I'm going to smooth this in a minute, the bottom edges of this will effectively start to thin out, and they're not going to be able to be used. The only bit that we're going to be taking from this once I've finished is the actual arch shape itself, and then you basically paste it onto a shape, and I'll show you that when we get to it. Okay, so this is currently using what is soon to be the quote old smoothing tool. The new one that's coming in, I'm not sure whether they said this week, but it is coming. The one thing you'll see what I need to do right now with the smoothing tool is you have to give whatever you want to smooth out a 1 voxel buffer around the entire shape. So that's basically above, below, left and right. And the new version of the smoothing tool coming in, you won't have to do that, and it also behaves a little bit differently, but for now we're stuck with what we have. Hey. So yeah, you can see now that effectively, because this was an edge on both sides here, it's really smoothed it out really thin. Which is no real use for this particular version, but it kind of gives you a hint of what happens with micro-voxels later down the line. But essentially, this is kind of a two-part, so what I'm going to do now is select the middle slice of this again, then create a new template with that, and then smooth that out, and that will give me my final arch. Yeah, the actual width you want to select is usually, you can only really do it by sight. It's quite a hard thing to figure out because if you select a too big an area, you'll end up effectively collecting the distorted edges of stuff, and you don't really want that. You want to try and keep it as smooth as humanly possible. So as I've only got a relatively small area, I'm only going to take like this one voxel slice that I've got. So yeah, you can kind of see that actually is relatively smooth. I was going to smooth that out again if it wasn't that good, but that one's actually reasonably okay. So yeah, when you've got these sort of arches, I mean, the bottom bits, you don't really want to keep them because obviously they're basically smoothing out into nothing. But you can effectively build from them quite happily, and it won't distort the rest of your arch. So yeah, when you start placing effectively a flat block onto a curve, provided you don't actually go up the side of the arch itself, it will hold its shape if you just basically select the bottom part of it. So that's the main difference of doing it slightly this way, is that unlike when you're just using the bog standard delete tool, you can pretty much make the arches more or less any width you want. So you're not really limited just to what are effectively the predetermined defaults. You can start messing around with different sizes and different shapes and stuff. Which brings me on to micro-voxels. The term I hate. For no real good reason, but it's essentially a smoothed out voxel. And for that, I'm coming back here. The one thing that's a little bit different with micro-voxels is that rather than doing what I have done here, where it's like you basically create a couple of stages where you make templates and go off there. And the micro-voxel technique is generally a little bit faster. It can vary by result though, and that can be where things can mess up. It's the nicest way I can put it. So for this, I'm actually not going to use this. Well, I will use this predetermined shape first, just to give you an example of how it will work differently. But then I'll show you how you can make a couple more advanced shapes. So, when you're using micro-voxels, the thing you've got to be aware of is that when you start with the base shape, things will mess up. Or it won't necessarily look like where you want to go with it. So if I actually just start smoothing this right down, helps if I actually select the right side. Yeah, with this, it's really imperative that you actually do put out the 1 voxel buffer, otherwise it won't do anything. Yay for doing it live. So yeah, as you can see, it's made like this really thin shape, and it looks a little bit bizarre, and it's not really an arch as such. So you can kind of see like where it's effectively the sections here where it's kind of got the wavy edge. The game does that because it's essentially the way the smoothing tool works currently is that to kind of make this sound like it makes sense anyway, the game needs something there to smooth. So the problem with having the template shape the way I had it over there is that it's only an edge. So the game will try and smooth out an edge, but then it's got nothing else to work with behind that. So that's kind of where you get like this really massive distortion. What you actually need to do is this. So you lay out your template the same. Yeah, so the only difference here is that you want to kind of keep your arch the same size, you don't want to change that. The only difference here is that you've effectively got space around it. So what happens is that the game will still try and make a shape, but it'll, because you've got space behind it, it will also try and keep its original shape a little bit more, if that makes sense. And you effectively do the same thing as what I was doing before. It's determined not to play nice with me today. So yeah, the top edge is closer to where I want it to be, but it's very determined not to be nice with me today. So I'll come back to that in a sec actually, because I wanted to kind of show something with different shapes and stuff as well. It was doing this with me yesterday actually as well, where some things weren't smoothing properly. Either that or it's just me not paying attention to what I'm selecting. That's also a possibility. But yeah, this is going back to the first version of the template you've got if you want to make different style shapes. Give me a sec, I need a better light source to show you this. The sun is coming up in game now, it's just that it's stuck behind these mountains and stuff right now. So I'm in a lovely black hole area, because I'm right in the middle of the valley. So yeah, when you're applying a curved shape to an existing structure, so I was doing this very roughly then, just basically using it on a cube space, the main thing you'll get, and this is kind of, they half hinted at this during the live stream, but you don't really want to put two thin slices of arches straight together, and I'll show you what happens if you do that in a minute. But the main logic of it is that, again, the smooth tool is a little bit temperamental, so you kind of need to give it a 1 voxel buffer even if you're placing it onto something. So the top of this arch, so yeah, you can see kind of where, essentially where I've got this white block, the edge of where your curve is, it'll kind of smooth out into wherever your next square voxel is. So it doesn't really matter what shape you've got, it does that all the way. So you can see just on the very last voxel, so that part of it, it will actually distort the pre-existing shape you have if you're placing something onto it afterwards, because it just doesn't like smooth voxels interacting with a square space. It will try and smooth it up into that square voxel shape. So it's a lot of that side of stuff is where a lot of people can come unstuck by it, just purely because you're trying to place what is a curve onto effectively a square surface afterwards, and it just gets nasty. However, so yeah, if I was to do it the other way around, so if I'm going to then place this template over that block, So yeah, this is where it's I wouldn't necessarily say the preferred, it's just the easier way to do it. I'm trying to think how best to say your name in chat there. For some reason I just wanted to go, Oi Dad! Yeah, is there a particular way to pronounce your name? Morning, by the way. It's afternoon for me, just. Literally only just. But yeah, hello. So, completely lost my train of thought because I was watching chat. Yeah, so if you place a rounded shape onto an existing structure, so that was still my 2x1 voxel square. There we go. The only difference is when I've placed that, it actually smoothed the shape for me. So you can kind of see where the one voxel of the white shape that I had. Ah. So it is Daddy-O backwards, yeah, okay. So yeah, so the one voxel I had there, because it was overlapping with the template I had, the game automatically smooths out that shape for me. And so it does a lot of the hard work. This is what I wanted to talk about when your archers can go wrong if you don't give them enough space to work with. So the problem that you get with template placing is, well, not necessarily the problem, but you kind of need to think ahead for what you're doing, is that the game will always prioritize the thing you put down last. So I very specifically did this way to kind of over exaggerate this, but the right side template that I placed down there, the game will automatically take priority over that. And the problem of it is that the left side of it, which isn't the same size or anything like that, because I've very purposely put it one voxel up high, it will distort that original shape. So you can kind of see in the middle there, I've got this really weird cutout shape because the game now wants to smooth this right side shape, which means changing the angle again of the little white area I had. So it's prioritized that shape. So it's prioritized that right-handed shape over the left side. And the problem of it is, even when you undo, the game will keep a lot of that predetermined shape, so it's actually taken a little bit more of the chunk off this side. And yeah, the game will always do that to a point. So if I just come back, it's actually creating a smooth point, and this is kind of where having a marker is quite useful, because I've basically used that little white space I had as a marker. It will remove that because it's prioritizing over the shape. So if I actually finish this off, so yeah, because this is essentially the main issue that you'll get whenever you're making fancier arches, is that if you try and overlap them or get them to touch and it's not a perfect shape, so if I actually just have that overlay next to it, because the top isn't a perfect flat, so you can kind of see it's off at an angle, because it's done that, the game physically can't smooth it out. It just won't. It'll just complain all day long at you. There's nothing you can do about it. The way you can keep the shape is effectively if you keep that on a flat edge, and the only way you can do that is to effectively change what template you're doing it off. So you can kind of fiddle this, but I'm going to essentially try and show you a slightly easier way of doing that. Which is why I didn't adjust this at the time. Uh-oh. My game has seemingly got a mind of its own. Hang on. Yay, alpha. Also, thank God it's daytime. So yeah, there's about 20 billion different ways you can do arches and stuff like this, but the biggest issue you'll tend to get, at least in terms of if you're starting to make your own shapes and angles and things like that, it's always going to be that distortion that you'll get out of it if you're not careful anyway. Sorry about that, bit of an unscheduled stop, I had someone at the door. This is why you don't do this stuff live. I don't think I've actually got enough space next to that. So, this is effectively the difference you'll get. It'll come out slightly different depending on how you... So a lot of it depends on how smooth you've got the edge. I mean, I've kind of skipped ahead because I didn't bother smoothing that secondary template again. But this is kind of where you can get around having that distortion, because the game has the edge to work off with, so it's got all this extra space above it. It won't give you like the really weird distortion in the middle. It'll actually keep the shape. And that tends to be the easier way to make the different shaped arches. So it's like, if you want to make that point, you can still do that, but it's a lot more important to select the bigger space around it. Otherwise, the game will just start overlapping stuff incorrectly, and it'll look proper minging. But yeah, I mean, you can kind of do it different ways. I mean, the one thing I tend not to like so much with micro-voxels like doing it like this tends to be a lot nicer if you want a much tighter curve. So it's like there's not a whole lot left to work with on there, so you won't necessarily get it as smooth. You can play around with it a lot, but yeah, you won't necessarily get it quite as smooth as if you kind of do it off the slightly larger scale. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to people's own personal preference. I mean, I tend not to prefer making these sort of arches, only really because when you're doing it with a micro-voxel shape, if you then want to get really fancy with it, like if I go and show you some like people's claims later down the line, you'll see like some people have done things like where they've put essentially grill shapes like in between where their arches are to effectively like make like a sort of fancy looking window kind of thing. And the problem of it is that if you do it using micro-voxels straight off the bat, so it's like if you've got this as your base shape, you're basically kind of putting yourself up for a monumental screw up, because it's, I mean, micro-voxels are fiddly at the best of times, but as soon as you start trying to do it off a curved shape to begin with, stuff will go wrong. It's the nicest way I can put it. So kind of what happens is the game won't smooth things out. So right now, because there's nothing in this space, that's the only really big advantage you'll get, is that if you do full size voxels, you won't get any mix-ups, because the game will just go, well, you're trying to place that here, I'll just fill in this with the tiniest amount of space possible. So if you're doing things like that where you want to put a normal size voxel, then yes, feel free. However, so yeah, again, slightly over-exaggerating this just to show kind of what happens with micro-voxels and smoothing. But you can see the edge where it joins up. So that one. Essentially where that initial voxel touches the wall. Because, again, a micro-voxel is just a normal size voxel smoothed down, so everything else gets distorted towards it. And then, and this is kind of where people can make fancy shapes and things, so you can kind of see it's made like its own little triangle because of where I placed the next selection of micro-voxels, and you can kind of get quite clever with that. but you do have to be really careful if you do it off a smoothed shape first, because the game will always try and smooth towards it, so you can kind of see, like, essentially around where that one voxel was, the whole edge of that wall has effectively kind of been sucked towards that point. And yeah, just to kind of show you there, so that's kind of where my little voxel was, that little white dot. But as you can see, because I've done it too close to what is an already smoothed edge, the game just kind of freaks out. So it's like it's all of a sudden that little one voxel, although it's a micro-voxel, the game still sees that I'm trying to place something that's effectively filling a one voxel size. So what was my lovely smoothed surface has been pulled towards that space. And the problem with microvoxels is when you undo something, it'll stay, basically. So although I've removed that space where the distortions happened, that will stay there, unless you basically replace that curve. So yeah, you have to kind of be not so necessarily patient, but you have to be very meticulous when you're going into doing essentially any design with microvoxel. If it's with the rule of thumb that I tend to do, unless you want it to specifically distort like that, make sure that you leave at least a voxel space around it, because otherwise it just won't happen. And in truth, you can make some really nice shapes with that when you're doing things. I mean, the way microvoxels interact, you can make quite nice shapes. And where things taper, like if I just zoom in on here, you can kind of see the bit of where the normal size voxel interacts with the smoothed out shape. You can actually use that to make quite a lot of nice smooth things. I mean, I use that quite a lot when I'm making balconies and things like that, just because you can kind of make nice smooth arches, and you can create it where it looks a little bit more stylized versus just a square block. But yeah, I mean, that's more or less all there is in terms of arches. I seem to have arches everywhere now. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to really what you prefer to do. You can mess around with it a little bit more, like rather than doing like the predetermined, like perfectly oval shape that I have here. If you want to do the tight arch like that, literally just change that shape. So I've got that right now, that base template. I've got that so that it always creates the smooth round edge. But if you want to kind of make fancier shapes and stuff, yeah, there's nothing really stopping you from doing that. All you need to do essentially is to replace that base template, and provided that you keep it. So if you're doing something like that, if you want to create a tighter shape, so long as you keep it symmetrical, it'll be fine. But you do have to kind of make sure that you place it out properly first. Otherwise, the game will just tell you to sod off. what are the odds of this doing this without crashing? There we go. Back to load in. Oh, is this or isn't it going to crash? I wanted to kind of show what was happening behind the scenes there, but I don't think it's like this. Give me a sec. Reload the game just so I can show you that. I'm only doing this little bit at the end just because I kind of want to show essentially what happens behind the scenes of the game. And the only way I can really show that is if I actually take off the smoothing effect. Wait. Welcome to Minecraft. So yeah, if people want to know what actually goes on behind the scenes, this is kind of the level of stuff you have to work with when you're doing voxel smoothing. Because what is effectively behind the scenes is just this. So everything fundamentally does remain square, never changes, and the only reason why it does that is effectively their game engine, because otherwise literally it doesn't matter what I've got, it all just stays like this. It's purely how the voxel smoothing works in game, and because it's a in-game render, that can be where certain bits and pieces screw up. So yeah, you do have to be careful, because everything that you're messing around with whenever you're smoothing, especially the micro-voxels, you can kind of see they, without voxel smoothing on, they are basically just voxels. And that's kind of where you do have to be careful of it, because it's all of that side of stuff you have to keep in mind. It's what the game is generating to your client. So if you're kind of not giving it the chance to render things correctly, that's where you get all those distortions from. Now, what are the odds of this crashing when I turn this back on again? Nope. Computer says no. Yeah, I mean, it's the only reason why I wanted to show what it looks like behind the scenes there is that, yeah, here we go. So, pretty much everything that's in my claim right now is effectively the game engine smoothing everything out for me. And that can be your best friend, but it can also be your worst enemy as well, especially when you're dealing with very, very small sizes. And that's kind of like the big thing you do have to keep in mind when you're doing those shapes, is that behind the scenes it is all square. All you're doing is basically creating a shape where the game will go, oh yeah, I kind of need to make that look like a smooth shape versus a square angle. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people, especially when they're doing like the very, very complex smoothing stuff, so a lot of people are doing it for sculpting and stuff like that, for very, very large scale stuff. They will pretty much always just start off with the square blocks, so they won't smooth anything for ages. And especially like some of like the really, really big builds, they'll just keep it all really, really square to start off with, because they don't want to start smoothing stuff straight away and watch the game basically self-demolish their lovely, lovely build. So the more complex shape you have, it's always better to start off basically placing down square blocks first, and then going in at a later date to try and smooth things out. If you're doing just small structures like this, it's a little bit different, because you can basically create the shape and off you go. But yeah, if you're doing very, very big builds, you really don't want to. You just don't want to be messing around with smoothing before you've actually got the whole shape in place. Otherwise, stuff will go horribly, horribly wrong. But yeah, believe it or not, that's more or less all I wanted to show on archers. I possibly will be doing some more streaming later tonight, which will be just general build stuff, because I wanted to get this archers bit out the way, because I'd cleaned out my claim, so it's like, well, while I've got the space to do it, I might as well show some stuff. But yeah, I've got a couple of bits and pieces I want to try and build later and template. I'm being very careful about stuff right now, because I don't want to kind of create a shape that I can't... I don't want to create a shape right now that I can't template up quickly and move. Only because both myself and a lot of the guild are moving around this area, but I'm going to be opening up my claim to co-op building when it comes out this week. So I'm very specifically trying to keep in mind that I want to have a completely blank claim, more or less, so that everyone has a blank slate to work with. But yeah, believe it or not, that is it. So yeah, thanks for sticking with me, guys. As with most things when you're doing it live, a lot of things don't necessarily work. But yeah, thanks. I'll probably see you again later. If you're not in the guild, or you want to just find out more about the guild, the best place is always to go to our website, eqnknights.co.uk. Alternatively, you can find us on things like Facebook and Twitter. We do have things like our YouTube channel and stuff as well, but I always say go to the website, because we try and keep pretty much everything up to date on the website as much as humanly possible. Best place is always to go to our website, eqnknights.co.uk.